The once proud Miami Hurricanes baseball program barely making it into the NCAA tournament and heading to the Hattiesburg Regional. Let's talk Canes baseball on Locked On Sunbelt.
You are Locked On Sunbelt, your daily podcast on the Sunbelt Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. For right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. All right, yesterday we did Alabama. Let's do Miami. Today, this is a four-time national champion, and you can't talk the history of baseball, college baseball anyways, without talking Miami Hurricanes baseball. You had Ron Frazier, you had Jim Morris, you had Pat Burrell, who had one of the all-time great college baseball seasons, Aubrey Huff, Ryan Braun, Alex Fernandez. I didn't realize Mike Pallarulo went to Miami, on and on and on. Charles Johnson went to Miami. They have a long storied history. Obviously, it has fallen off as of recently. They actually have a little bit of a Sun Belt history. They actually played South Alabama. They did advance out of that regional. That was actually the Gators regional. It was Miami beating South Alabama after South Alabama knocked off the Gators. And then they beat the Cajuns. And I think Texas beat Miami in Miami's own regional. But let's talk Miami Hurricanes baseball with the host of Locked On Canes. He's Alex Donno, and he is Locked On Sunbelt. Welcome back to another edition of Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. Yesterday, we did the University of Alabama. Let's do the Miami Hurricanes. We bring in Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. Also in that Hattiesburg Southern Miss Regional, another great football matchup, as it turns out. Miami had an RPI of 40. They sneak in to the NCAAs. We have a little Sunbelt history here, Alex. It seems like the Sunbelt and Miami have a little recent history. A few years ago, Miami took down South Alabama in actually what was a classic first game, 1-0. And then South Alabama did the deed of taking out the Florida Gators. And then South Alabama didn't have enough pitching, and so Miami beat them later on. And then a couple of years ago, the Raging Cajuns went down to South Florida, and Miami did a number on them then. Although I think Texas may have come out of the South Regional, out of that regional. But anyways, it seems like the Sun Belt and Miami have a long history. Why don't you recap Miami's season, and we'll get into later on, the long storied history of Miami baseball, because you really can't talk college baseball without talking Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, Miami's baseball season this year, Dave, was just the definition of a roller coaster. Awful start out of the gates. I mean, they did sweep Niagara in their first, non-conference home series, which was not the hardest of work. But then they started off with, I think, just 3 wins in their first 9 ACC games. They were 15-15 at a point in early April. And, you may have noticed this, and, you've lived and worked in Miami before. Miami fans, whether it's football or baseball or otherwise, are not always very patient, right? So, near that midway point of the season, there was a lot of unrest in the fan base. Miami's baseball fan base, it's not huge, but it's very hardcore and very dedicated. And that was something that I learned when I was doing student radio at WVUM in Miami a long time ago. If I'm calling a Miami baseball game and God forbid I say somebody's batting average wrong or I pronounce somebody's name wrong, the fan base and even the parents are going to get all over you. It's a very passionate Miami baseball fan base. And so, man, folks down here were not happy with J.D. Arteaga, who, this is his second season as head coach. He'd been a longtime pitching coach at Miami, so he's got that history in orange and green, but, hadn't really had success as a head coach. Certainly to that point, he missed the tournament completely last year in his first year and was very much on track to miss the tournament. And just when you thought Miami was out of it, Dave, they really found something with their pitching. Griffin Hugus, who's their Friday starter and is going to start the game against Alabama this Friday in the regional, really started to light it up. I think about 85 Ks on the season, and moving Brian Walters into a relief role has been big for Miami. And Daniel Cuvet, we call him Danny Dingers, leads the team with 16 home runs. He's really, one of the true power hitters on Miami. Jake Ogden is another infielder who had a pretty good year with his bat this season. And Miami caught fire to the tune of winning 10 consecutive ACC games, Dave, and winning consecutive series against Pittsburgh, Duke, Georgia Tech, which was a big one, Boston College, and NC State. They went 15-3 during that stretch, and they got themselves back into the tournament. They did fade then their final series down the stretch, including a late series against Notre Dame where they didn't look very good. So they started terribly, they caught fire, and then they didn't finish very well. So I think there were some questions. Now, I had read enough of the preview content and the projected brackets to feel pretty confident on selection day that Miami was going to be heading to a regional. There were some doubts in the fan base. So Miami comes up with the 3 seed in the South Alabama Regional. And to be honest, I know it's obviously not the best seeding, and I'm old enough to remember when Miami used to be hosting regionals and super regionals every single year. But based on the way the season started and the way the season ended, I think there is a feeling that Miami is fortunate to have this opportunity in the postseason.
I was down there one regional. Goodness, the regional I'm not sure ended until Tuesday. Because, it never rains down there in South Florida in June. Rain down in South Florida very rarely in June. And I was gonna say, you say the fans can get a little bit frustrated with the team. You never hear that from the radio broadcaster, from the voice of the Canes. He's very even keeled when it comes to Miami Hurricanes sports. You never can tell how they're playing if you listen to Joe Zagacki and the voice of the Miami Hurricanes.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about Joe, he always says what's on his mind, including if he's not so happy with a football ref or a baseball umpire, he will let you know, and it's a great listen.
Yes, and very much so is. Talking to Alex Donno, former colleague at 560 WQAM. It's not the Joe anymore, right? We're past that. No. It's not the Joe.
I don't know what that was about, but they're back to just WQAM.
Right. They named it, for those who don't know, they named it after the morning show host Joe Rose, whose really claim to fame is he caught Dan Marino's first touchdown pass. So longtime sports personality down in South Florida, really good sports talk show host, and a very nice man, actually. But they changed the name of the radio station to 560 to the Joe, which is just hilarious. But we've sidetracked. All right, back to Locked On Sunbelt. Your teams every day. Let's talk Miami Hurricanes baseball. All right, so what is the identity of this team compared to some others with Miami in terms of, you're talking pitching. They have obviously some power in the lineup. Yeah. How does Miami try and go about winning ball games? Because, Southern Miss is rather, balanced, although I would tell you that it's, the pitching is where their strength is. They have a really solid lineup, but if they're going to win, it's going to be because the pitching shuts down the opposing lineups. And Miami and Alabama have two very imposing lineups, as the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I don't think Miami's lineup is imposing enough. And that's one of the reasons why they're in the position that they're in, kind of scratching and clawing just to make the postseason. I think they're, when it comes to really sparking the bats, I think they're very reliant on Daniel Cuvet, Golden Spike semifinalists, and on Jake Ogden, and they're reliant on their pitching. And, I think they're going to be in pretty good shape there based on the form that Griffin Hugus has been in, and, also having guys like Nick Robert and Lazaro Colea, and Brian Walters is the closer who's capable of starting. He actually started the season in the rotation before moving to the closer role. So they do have some depth and versatility in the pitching. I don't think enough depth in the lineup. So if you're asking me what Miami's identity is, you see sparks and flashes of some of the great Miami teams from, the ones that I really remember from the 90s and the early 2000s when the bats get going, they really get going, Dave. That when you see, it's usually Cuvet is the guy who hits a big home run, and it really seems to spark the bats, that they're capable of putting up 13, 15 runs in certain games, but then they're also capable of getting a little bit dry and putting up just a couple of runs in a game, which is usually not a recipe for success in college baseball. So I really think the identity of this team is they are capable. If they can recapture, the form that they were in from, mid-April to mid-May, where they're winning 5 consecutive ACC series. And at one point, I think it was 10 or 11 consecutive ACC games they'd won, including a few sweeps in that mix. Then if they can find that form, then they could potentially terrorize this regional, which I think is a really tough region for them. Because from what I've been able to tell, I'm not an SEC baseball expert, but I think Alabama's got, deeper lineup when it comes to their bats and their hitting. So I think that's going to be a really tough matchup opening day. Griffin Hugus, who's got this glorious mustache, Miami's starting pitcher that day, is going to have to be dealing to really quiet that lineup. And I'm definitely concerned about Southern Miss, and I'm a little bit concerned about Columbia as well, because I was reading about them, and it seems like they tore through the Ivy League. So this is not an easy region for Miami whatsoever.
I don't mean to, and Kendall Rogers said that, and Kendall Rogers from D1 Baseball knows much more than I do. But since they beat Kennesaw State, like the first game of the year, and they haven't played anybody, so that's scheduling, so I understand that.
Right.
But they haven't beaten anybody higher than 100 RPI outside of Fairfield, and that's it. So I don't know how Columbia could be good. They're just not battle tested, right? I mean, they haven't played anybody. So I don't know. We'll find out. I mean, we got a situation where this could happen to Southern Miss, right? We'll see. They beat Columbia and then they go 0-2. Is that going to be because, they had just come off an 18-game winning streak, but they hadn't played anybody in that outside of Troy. And Troy, we find out, wasn't quite as good as everybody thought they were. All right. Although they should have probably been in the NCAA tournament. All right. So now, the definition of overrated is you're not as good as we think you are. And so that 18-game winning streak was against teams that were not necessarily very good, except Troy. Not going to take anything away from Southern Miss because they went on the road and beat Troy 3 times. And outside of one game, beat him pretty handily. But nonetheless, we found out Troy was a little bit overrated. They didn't do well in the Sun Belt Conference tournament the way they should have and miss out on the NCAA tournament. So we shall see. But I'm not so sure about Columbia. We'll see. We'll see. I don't think they're necessarily going to get spooked out. That's not what I'm thinking. Although anybody could get spooked out playing at the Pete. These teams, they pack in. I checked midweek ball game in April. They had 5,200 people there. That's not what the paid attendance was. I went back and looked at the replay. The park was full. So you can guarantee that the park will be overflowing when this happens, when these games happen. So looking forward to that. Let's take a time out. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation with the host of Locked On Canes, Alex Donno, and we talk more about the Miami Hurricanes pitching rotation and where may the soft spot be in that rotation. But first, let me tell you about FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. I'm going to talk college baseball. Coastal Carolina to win it all, 31-1 odds. Southern Miss to win it all, 50-1 odds. Lay a few bucks on that. You could come away big winners if they do pull off the championship. New to FanDuel, it's a perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Dave Schultz, Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. Let's continue our conversation with Alex Donno, the host of Locked On Canes, talking pitching rotation of the Miami Hurricanes in the Hattiesburg Regional. We're talking to Alex Donno. He is the host of Locked On Canes. All right, you brought up Griffin Hugus. What about the Saturday pitcher? Because he seems to have a little bit better numbers than Hugus does, and that's AJ Siskar. He's really good, but you expect him to go in the second ballgame.
Yeah, I expect him. And Hugus, I think, started off as the Saturday pitcher, and then he caught fire and moved to Friday. And Siskar is, I think he's been a little bit more inconsistent as of late. I think Hugus, if I'm not mistaken, has more strikeouts this season, but I think the 1-2 punch is pretty good, as Miami's going to try to set the tone this weekend with both of them. But yeah, I mean, I think pitching to me has to be Miami's strength, because I don't think they have enough consistent power from their bats. But if they can get that consistent pitching, especially from their first two starters, then I think they have a shot.
So do they have so Alabama, there I'm told they have one really good starting pitcher, and the closer, who ironically is out of the Ivy League, set an Alabama record with 17 saves, a little crafty right-hander, I guess. But other than that, it's a little bit wobbly. And of course, it doesn't matter what level you are. The bullpen is always, the middle bullpen is always the big question. Where is the underbelly in the Hurricanes staff? Is it the depth? Do they have lack of arms after the two starters? And we got to get to the closer is the problem.
Yes, for like a lot of teams, it's the bullpen. That is the lack. And it's why, for anyone who did have the misfortune of waking up early and watching Miami's first and only ACC tournament game, where they got mercy ruled at 9 a.m. By Cal, you could see, the underbelly it's very much in the staff. It's very much the middle relief.
All right, we're talking with Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. It is Locked On Sunbelt, your teams every day. Trying to preview the Southern Miss Hattiesburg Regional. So we got Alabama, we got Miami, and of course, Columbia. All right, so what do you think the chances are? Let's talk about Miami versus Alabama. They think that Riley Quick is going to be going. I think he's the Saturday night pitcher. He's the one who's going to go against Alabama, or against Miami. We're still not sure about what Southern Miss is doing, although they trend not to mess around. And it could be J.B. Middleton going against Columbia. I would hold back J.B. Middleton. He's the ace. I would wait for him to pitch against Miami or Alabama, but I'm not the coach. Someone gets paid a lot more money than I make to make those decisions. Matt Adams is very good. He's not J.B. Middleton. All right. They have a good bullpen. Two guys at the end, specifically Colby Allen. So we'll see what happens there. How do you think Miami shapes up against Alabama?
I think Miami needs to they need to jump on them, I believe, because again, going back to the middle relief, I think if Miami falls behind, I think it could get ugly in the middle innings, fourth, fifth, sixth inning. So really, I think you're going to need to see Miami's lineup, especially Cuvet, put Miami on top early on. And I think it's also going to be an interesting angle. I know that both sides are handling this pretty well, like it's just any other opponent, just any other ball game. But Alabama's current third baseman was a star on Miami last year, Jason Torres, who transferred over, had a lot of success on Miami last season. So that's going to be a familiar face. I'm sure he's going to spend some time shaking hands with his buddies, and they'll try to keep his bat quiet. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't think Miami has the depth. If this were a 3-game series in Tuscaloosa, I'd be extremely worried. But you're talking about, first game, 1-game situation. If Miami can, find consistency in their inconsistency and look like the Miami that, got themselves into this tournament when it looked like they were going to miss everything, ACC tournament, NCAA tournament at all, I think Miami's got a shot. But I think they need to jump ahead early, and, hopefully Hugus can have a couple of quick innings early on.
So it kind of feels like Torres, that feels just pure NIL to going from Miami to Alabama, which is, that's the deal these days.
Yeah. Well, and NIL, I'm sure, is part of it. And also, just and we'll talk more about it. Miami baseball for the last few years, really since like a couple of years before Jim Morris retired, has just not really been Miami baseball. So, Torres probably looked at it as a step up in profile. And again, I know Miami is trying to rebuild this thing to the teams that I grew up loving, because I grew up when Miami baseball was winning national championships and going to Omaha just about every year. But they've not been that for the past 4 or 5 years. So, transfers, unfortunately, are going to happen. Miami has had some good transfers in. Hugus came over from Cincinnati, for example. And it's one of the tough things when it comes to expensive private institutions. That's what Miami is. With baseball having half scholarships for most of the roster, the tuition gets very expensive. I mean, if you're going to have a 50% scholarship at Miami versus a 50% scholarship at a state school, those bills are going to run up pretty quickly for mom and dad back home.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. All right, let's take one more time out. We'll come back and wrap things up with Alex Donno, the host of Locked On Canes. You can't talk the history of college baseball without talking about Miami Hurricanes baseball, and he goes through some of it. Pat Burrell had one of the all-time great seasons in college baseball history, and can Miami get back to that greatness? They're a 4-time national champion. It's been a minute since they've been that good. We'll do that when we come back after I thank you. Continued thanks. Really mean it. I told you, when I get views, anything more than 100 used to be good. Now it's 1,000. Even that one tweet that I put out was 6,000 on Wednesday morning. It had gotten 3 more thousand by Wednesday afternoon, commenting that I didn't want to hear about any kind of tough regional, more Coastal Carolina than Southern Miss complaining, but that's not the point. By the time I wake up and you see this, or you wake up, it's going to be 10,000 views. So really appreciate it. See if we can get to 2,000 subscribers. We'll see if we get some Alabama folks, more Southern Miss folks, and Miami folks, maybe even some Columbia folks tuning in, as it should be a fun regional in Hattiesburg. On Friday's episode, we will talk Florida Gators. So we'll talk some Coastal Carolina in there as well. But thank you so much. The channel continues to grow leaps and bounds. It looks like this is going to be May 2025 is going to be our third best month ever, which is following our best month ever. Not too shabby. Thank you so much. All right, let's wrap things up with the host of Locked On Canes, Alex Donno, as he talks the history of Miami Hurricanes baseball and can they reach what used to be great Canes baseball teams. All right, so let's talk about the history of Miami baseball. Again, you can't talk about the history of college baseball without talking about, Ron Frazier. All right, yeah. And it even crossed with Skip Bertman. Skip Bertman started his career down in South Florida. I mean, I saw the Skip Bertman story. He may or may not have called the hidden ball trick with Wichita State. That may have been his idea with Gene Stevenson in Wichita State. I crossed paths. I was a lowly intern my first year out of school. And Team USA came calling to Wichita, Kansas. Team USA. And so you had a bunch of guys from Wichita State on that team, including Doug Mirabelli and Chris Wimmer, and I believe Darren Dreifert were on that team. Also, some guys named Charles Johnson was on that team, and Jason Veritek was on that team, and a high school kid who hadn't gone to college yet. He was headed to Georgia Tech, some guy named Nomar Garcia Parr. You let me know if he made it. I'm not sure if he made it. He might have made it.
He made it.
He made it. So they were actually playing. They didn't play Wichita State. They played Japan. But those are that was Team USA. Ricky Green from LSU was there. It was quite the squad. And so Ron Frazier was the coach. But so what do you remember about Miami? Because they did win. Ron Frazier won a couple of national championships. Jim Morris won a couple of national championships. A lot of times they did not get there. He always would go. They always went to the super regionals and always lost a lot. but they always had some great teams. Again, Aubrey Huff, Pat Burrell.
Yeah.
Pat Burrell had one of the great seasons of college baseball history. I mean, hit like 500 or something like that. He hit a ridiculous amount. What do you remember about Miami baseball?
Yeah, it starts to me with Pat Burrell. Some of my best memories watching him hit home runs, and Aubrey Huff as well was an absolute monster at Miami. And then when I was going to school there in the early 2000s, I went to school with Ryan Brahm, who was another great one who you could always count on, whether it be in Omaha or in the regular season. And grew up watching Ron Frazier and then seeing Jim Morris taking over pretty seamlessly and keeping that program at or near the top of college baseball. And so, to me, it's like, it's hard to explain it, to people who didn't grow up going to Miami games or don't go to because it's still a great atmosphere now at what's actually now called Alex Rodriguez Park at Mark Light Field, which is another interesting bit of trivia. A-Rod did not go to college, of course. He made a smart decision to go.
No, he did not.
Directly to the pros, brief stint in the minors, and then got his career with the Mariners off and running. But A-Rod actually came very close to playing college ball at Miami, to the point where like he was about to step on campus, and there was like some rule that if he went to if he stepped on campus, then he wasn't eligible for the draft, and so he ended up like almost taking a tour and signing with Miami, but not signing with Miami. And A-Rod has actually been one of the great donors to the Miami baseball program over the years. When they did much needed renovations on Mark Light Field, around a decade ago, Alex Rodriguez footed most of that bill. So it's like he's almost like an honorary Miami Hurricane, even though he never played for the team. But in terms of Miami baseball, I mentioned earlier, the fan base is, obviously small compared to the legions around the country who know about the U for football. But it's as hardcore of a group of a couple few thousand people that show up for every weekend series at Mark Light and Coral Gables. The coordinated chants. There's been a guy for like the past 30 years that if the opposing pitcher is struggling, he yells out "rag arm." And they have and one of the best things about Miami baseball, and people who are on social media probably see this, the Mark Light shakes, the milkshakes, are like nationally famous. It's some of the best. They've got shakes that are named after former players and announcers. Joe Zagacki actually has his own shake. I'm trying to get my own shake at some point there. It's just a great atmosphere, great family atmosphere. My father used to take me out to games, and I try to take my son out to games as much as I possibly can now. And this is a program that has won 4 national championships, and a lot of the success that the baseball program had was actually in lockstep in the timeline of when the football program was winning national titles.
That's right.
1983 and 2001. So it was just a crazy time. I attended Miami in the early 2000s when the football team was still really good and the baseball team was still really good. There was just something magic about that, about 20-year stretch where it was like between Miami baseball and football, they win 9 national titles between the two of them during that run. And there's just something magic about going out to these games at Mark Light. And, and we hope they can get some of that back, Dave, because, I felt kind of old when I realized, this week when Miami gets selected for this Southern Miss Regional, the last time Miami actually advanced through a regional was 2016. So 9 years. 9 years for a once proud program. And I believe I have this correct. The last time that they advanced through a road regional, is in one that they're not hosting, was about a decade prior to that. I think 2006.
Oh, so, no. I thought they advanced through that Florida regional. Check that out in 2021. They would have beaten.
I might have had that. I hope I had that wrong, because that's not nearly as bad.
They beat South Alabama. They had a crazy. They beat South Alabama 1-0 in the first game.
That's right.
That was it. It was a great pitchers matchup. And then again, South Alabama beat Florida. I mean, I think they scored 10 runs with 2 outs. And then South Alabama ran out of pitching. And so, because they had to play one more game, and then it got away from South Alabama at the end. So I think Miami won that regional. So they would have gone to the Supers in in 2021, I think. But just to give people an idea, if they don't know, when I say, I probably overstated it, but not by too much. In 1996, Pat Burrell was a freshman leading Miami to the national championship game. He hit .484, hit 23 home runs, and 64 runs batted in.
Incredible. And I remember going to games. I was about, I think I was 12, 13 at that time, going out to the park with my dad. Like we lived closer to Coral Gables than to where the Marlins played. But I enjoyed going to college baseball games a lot more than I enjoyed going to Major League Baseball games. And, it's like, I think that they can come back, Dave, and rediscover some of the success that this program used to have. I was encouraged by the run that they had this season to get into the tournament, because the program, the mid-April or early April, really the program was looking dead. Like, this is like everybody needs to get fired. The baseball program needs an exorcism. I thought, JD Arteaga, the former longtime pitching coach, who's the head coach, the manager now, I thought saved a lot of face with the way that they were able to battle through. And I hope that they have a respectable regional and they get a couple of wins coming up here. But it's the program's fallen on hard times, really. Even the last couple of years of, Jim Morris before he retired. And then I just think they've had uninspiring coaching hires since. It's always been promotion from within. Right. They promoted Gino DeMare was the head coach for a few years, and just, the program continued to spiral downward. And then JD Arteaga, who was on Gino's staff, takes over for Gino. And to me, it's like, if something's not working with a program, I usually don't feel like hiring from within is the answer. And Miami's done that the last 2 times. So I hope it works out for JD, because he's a great guy and he works very hard. But it was odd to a lot of people that when the DeMare teams were failing, when he got fired, why they would promote from within. A lot of Miami fans just have had trouble wrapping their heads around that. But, obviously South Florida baseball talent, it's always going to be there. The program history and prestige is always going to be there. And, my University of Miami, it's a great campus, and it's obviously a fun city to live in. So there is the potential. And I think the athletic department at Miami, really needs to start investing in baseball the way that they've invested in football for the past few years, because, the football program, as we all know, fell on some very hard times. And, they have since really improved the facilities. They're spending a lot more money on coaches and assistant coaches. Miami's very competitive in the NIL space. And I think they do try to be in baseball as well. Certainly in basketball, they're trending up there as well. And so I think it's important. I know baseball, it's not a revenue sport in the way that football and basketball are, but I think it's really important for the university's future, and it's important to the university's past. So I hope that they can really invest what it takes to put the baseball program on top again, because the talent is always going to be in the area and the potential is always going to be there.
Well, college baseball is so localized for 3/4 of the season, or like 90% of the season. And now for the next 3 weeks, everybody's watching everybody, right? Because we watch the regional, and then we watch the super regional, and then everyone tunes in for the College World Series, and we get to see all the teams that we weren't covering all year long. And I do appreciate the point where, half a scholarship to Miami, right, costs almost probably as much as, what a whole thing to the University of Florida or Florida State costs.
Yeah. I'm going to try to see real quick if I can pull up what would you like to know the average cost of a school year at the University of Miami?
I'm going to guess, because Syracuse is outrageously expensive and they don't have a baseball team. But I bet you tuition at Miami's got to be at least $50,000.
Yeah, it's over 60. Tuition is around 60,718 according to Google AI. So that's not that expensive when I went there.
That's called tuition. That's not room and board.
No.
So we're looking at $75,000.
Yeah. Just the tuition alone is over 60. So if you have a half scholarship, you're looking at $30,000 just in tuition.
And so what's the University of Florida University of Florida in state is going to be half of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
No, that's a
So
big. That's a big difference.
that's the tough thing about baseball. I mean, football, full scholarships, basketball, full scholarships, the half scholarship thing in baseball, it does make it tougher, for schools like Miami to
Sure.
match up with that.
All right, he is Alex Donno. He is the host of Locked On Canes. Always great catching up with you. I really need to see a picture of the voice of the Canes, Joe Zagacki, in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, something I probably never thought I'd get to see. All right, I've told somebody to reach out to him because he's the absolute best.
He is the man. I love Joe.
I appreciate it, Alex. Thank you so much for hopping on Locked On Sunbelt. It should be a whale of a regional, and I hope you get a chance to watch it. So it should be a lot of fun. You'll be really impressed with the Southern Miss faithful.
Thanks so much, Dave.